All right, we use Git because we want to keep track of our changes, right? So when you start off, who's ever had a situation where they said, hey, it was just working and now it's broken. And I don't know what the hell I did to get it broken like this. Well, we've all had this. If you're a developer, this has happened before, yeah? Well, the way that Git allows you, what it allows you to do, there's two ways you can use Git. You can use Git just locally, and that's how it started. Way back in the day, there was no GitHub. There was no cloud service, right? So Git was used on the command line. We used a local repository, and there's a hidden folder that keeps track of your changes where you can do comparisons. That's what happens with Git, right? So the first thing we want to try and learn to do is use Git locally. So how do I set up a Git repository? There's two ways to do that. One with the client, as Rich mentioned, and the other one on the command line. Let's start the hard way. Let's start with the command line. So pull up your command prompt. If you've downloaded the desktop client, and again, you would find that, just going to use your Chrome here, you'd find that if you went to GitHub, if you go to desktop.github.com.
It's on the lab machines already. If you don't have it on your own machine, it's a quick download.
That's right, and you can grab it from here. It's cross platform, so it'll work on both Windows and Mac, not Linux, unfortunately. They have their own little client for Git and GitHub. But if you're a Mac or Windows user, you're good to go. You download the client, it kind of looks like this. And it also installs a version of PowerShell that they call Git Shell. And if you notice, we have that on the desktop here. Okay? So if you have Git Shell, that's the preferred way of doing it. Let's do it both ways. Let's do a couple of repos on the desktop without Git Shell. I'm just going to minimize this. I'll use a command prompt. Okay, there's the command prompt. And if you're set up properly on the regular command prompt, you should be able to use the Git command just by going like this. Git, oops, if I can type Git, right? And if you know, if it comes up like this, it's installed properly, right? Now there's advantage and disadvantage. Let's talk about this. So I want to create a folder on the desktop. I'm just going to go here. I'm on the desktop. I'm going to go new. I'm going to go folder, and we're going to kind of do repo 1. We'll call it repo 1 for now, just as a local repo to get comfortable doing this. So here's my repo 1. It's empty, and let's install kind of just a basic a text file I'm going to put into it. So we're going to go to text document, and we're going to kind of put sample. We're going to sample text document. Doesn't matter what you call it, right? You can call it if you're going to do a real document, maybe you'd call it an index.html or something that you want to keep track of, and that's probably more relevant to us, or some kind of JS file. So let's just do that, index.html. Doesn't matter. We'll say yes to this one. Are you with me?
No. No. Yes. Too fast.
Don't worry. I'm going to repeat the steps over and over again. And it's being recorded, likely. So you can always go back and rewatch this stuff, right? So that's the reason why we do the recordings for you. OK, so all I've done is I've gone onto the desktop, created a folder by right-clicking on the desktop with the context menu, going new, and then folder. And then from there, I've just created a text file. When you're in the folder, right-click. For those people who know how to do this, new, or if you don't, it's okay, text document, and then just rename it to index.html. The index.html document, even though it's an HTML document, is empty, obviously. There's nothing in there. There's no, if you notice, there's 0K from a size perspective. Are you with me now? All right, so I've got this repo, or this folder right now. It's not a repo. I've got to navigate to it, right, here. And there's a couple ways I could do that. I could swim through the structure and look at Rich's desktop. So, I can do a directory. I can see that there's a desktop here, right here, and I can do something like this: cd, start typing, press tab. It'll fill it in for you, right, and press enter. And then I can do a directory, and I can notice that there is repo 1, right? So I can kind of do a cd, change directory. To repo, start typing it. It'll fill it in when you press tab, enter. If I do a directory again, that's one way of doing it, and I can see that there's nothing in there, right? It's empty, right? The other way, I'm just going to restart my command line. So let's say you start from scratch again. The other way to do it is to drag and drop, right? So I'm going to go cd, and then if I drag this one in here, right, as an example, it kind of gives you the exact location, the path, right, where you want to go. That's another way you can navigate there, and it takes you right in there, right? I think the drag and drop is a better solution, right, for me. 2 seconds, you don't have to think about where the path is, and then you're good to go. Are you with me? Okay, I'm going to go fast after this, so keep up. Right, sorry, Karen. I apologize, right? We have a limited time. I'm a guest speaker, so I don't want to take up too much of Rich's time, so I'm in and out, right? Okay, no more fist jokes. Let's go to the next part. Now, the next piece I want to do is on the command line, I've got to initialize the Git repo, and to do that, the command is git, follow me here, init, right? Very simple. Git init, initialize the repo, right? Now, if your Git is working and it's installed properly in your system, you'll get this message: initialized empty Git repository for blah blah blah, right? The next piece is to add all your files to the Git repo. This is the simplistic way of doing it, and the way to do that, of course, is to do git add dot. And when you do that, it adds everything that's in the repository. And right now we have one file, index.html, into the repository. Let's do a list. So here's our list. We have an index.html. You can't really tell that there's anything different about this repository, this folder, compared to what a normal folder will look like, right? Because the files and folders containing the repository are hidden. So if I go dr, I think /al, dr, there's nothing. Let's see if we do that. No. If the thing is with this, right, if we want to look at the directory structure at all, there's nothing in here that appears to be different, right? But it is keeping track for you. Okay, so that's piece one. We're still not finished, though. We still have to do something called a commit. Who knows what a commit is? Okay, if you've kind of done this before, a commit's like a snapshot. So think about, I want to take a snapshot of my files, right? I want to take a snapshot, and what it's going to do is going to take kind of a memory shot, if you will, of that file and save it in this hidden folder that you can't see, so we can compare from this version right here to the next version if we're going to modify our index.html in the future, right? So it's going to take a snapshot. But we have to name that snapshot. We have to give it some kind of description. The commit is not only the snapshot, but the description of what we're doing, okay? So this is how we do that. We go git commit -m. We'll talk about -m in a second. And then the name of your commit in quotation marks. Something like initial commit is the standard. Or you can say first commit. Those are the two ways we do things, right? Press enter. And then what it does is it adds it on. It adds the commit into your repository, right? So it keeps track of all of our commits. So if I have several commits, if I do one after the other, right, each one of them has a special number associated to it, or a code that separates one commit from another, and your system generates that. Your Git application that's running in the background here will generate that. Okay, here's another thing. So now I want to know what kind of commits I have. How do I check to see what my how my Git repository stands? On the command line, you do something like this: git status. If I do git status, it shows me on branch master, nothing to commit, working directory clean. So because I've already committed everything I have in there, right? If I was a commit behind, let's say, for example, I made some changes to my file, to my index.html, and then I haven't committed any changes, then I would say, you have an index.html file you've worked on, and then you're behind. You need to do a commit. The other one you want to learn is git log. And git log, what it does is it shows you the commit. And if you notice, there's only one commit here. That's that big long number. Take a look at that big long number. Do you think that number could be duplicated by chance? Chances are not, right? It's going to be unique, right? So it's coded so that your number is a combination of the date time plus your system plus a bunch of other factors to create this number, right? So again, we only have one commit, initial commit, right? Great. So step one is what we've done. We've kind of created a repository, we've created our commit, and it's only local, right? If I do another commit, it would show up here. If I was to do a git log, there'd be another commit there, right? How do I connect it now to GitHub? GitHub Cloud Service, where there's another potential repo out there where we can link to, and we can push our local repository, every change we've made, all the files we have. And by the way, we can specify which files we want to send up and which files we don't. We'll talk about that later on. We have to connect somehow to GitHub. How to do that? So let's go. This is all by command line, right? So I'm going to go to GitHub. and if Rich is logged in here, then we should go right into his repo. Let's get Rich to sign in. Sorry, Rich, I'm using
Here, or just
Chrome.
I'm
Okay, there we go.
in here in Firefox.
Okay, here we go. Are you in?
Yeah.
All right. So if you notice on the right here, picture of you as in your profile view, and also this little plus sign. So follow me here. Go up on your GitHub. You guys should all have it because you've done the lab, yeah? So go up to GitHub, and now you're going to see this little plus sign on the top. Now yours may look a little different like this. It might take you right into your repository view or your dashboard view, if you will, right? So it may not look like this. Okay, or maybe you've clicked this off and it won't come up anymore. But don't worry about that. The plus is the important piece. So let's click on the plus. There's two options that come up: new repository and new organization. Some of you may be tempted to create a new organization, right? You might say, well, what is this new organization thing that you speak of, Tom, right? It's like if I was working with Karen, right? And I'm sorry, and Ari, let's say, and Ari, Karen, and I were making our own little company, right? Or let's say I was working on a project, right? That's another thing I can do. I can create an organization, and I can include Ari and Karen together in my organization. We can be contributors together, working together on this project, right? That's one use, right? We can collaborate.
So it's like, but is it accessible then from our GitHub?
Is it accessible from your GitHub? If I include you, if I invite you into the organization, yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
All right, so that's the way it works. The other way to do it is not to create an organization, but rather create collaborators in my own Git repository. We can do that per repository or for the entire organization and create a team. It's really up to us. Organizations are free if you're using GitHub. A little bit more complex to set up, so we won't do it today, but just keep in mind what that is. Let's go into new repository. So if I go into my new repository, there's some options here, all right? So again, this is Rich's GitHub, right, as an example. If you notice, there's a couple of options before I create my name: public or private. Okay, so let's go into here to create my name. Now remember, we made this repo1 kind of thing. That's what the name is on our local desktop, right? So let's keep the same name. So we'll just call it repo1 for now, right? And if it checks out, if it's not something that Rich has in his local GitHub, and if you don't have this in your local GitHub, it'll be a check mark, because it's gonna produce almost like your own little subsite, if you will, on GitHub. It'll be github.com/ifotn for Rich's GitHub, and then followed by repo1. That's what it'll look like when you go to that subsite. I'll show you this in a second, right? So that's the first. You can create a description if you want. Let's leave it blank for now. You can also initialize the repo with a README. Let's leave that blank for now, right? And you can also add a git ignore, and we'll talk about what that is, and a license, right? License is what kind of license do you want. You can choose if you're sharing your files on GitHub, if you want to use an MIT license and so on. Right now we're not licensing anything, so we're going to leave it as blank. And from a git ignore perspective, what this does is it allows us to ignore certain types of files. For example, let's say if I didn't want to give up anything like node modules, which we're going to learn in the future. I don't want all my node modules to be on GitHub because there's thousands of files. I can exclude them with a git ignore file. Right now, though, we're not excluding anything because we're just creating a simple repo. Let's go into create repository here. When I create my repository, if everything goes well, I get this URI, right? Now, there's also some really cool instructions here if you don't know what to do. It tells you, if you started from this particular way, it tells you exactly all the commands I just kind of did, right, other than this README piece, how to create things on the command line. So if you don't remember my steps, it's okay because they're right here, right? This is the one thing. Then what I want to do is I want to add this piece, right? Git remote. I'm adding a remote piece to my local repository, right? That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do this command right now. Here's the URI. I'm going to do exactly this command on the command line. There's two ways to do this. I can type it longhand, or I can copy it, right? Copy, go to my command line, right click, and then paste. And it'll paste the command line, or the command that I want, right into my repo. And then press enter. If I've pressed enter, and if Git's set up properly in your system, this is okay. This works. Okay. If it's not set up properly in your system, sometimes it might kick out an error. And we'll talk about those in a second. Now we're going to do the next piece. And I can copy and paste, but it's such a short command. I'm just going to type it in. It's going to be git push -u, right? Origin master. Okay. And then press enter. If Rich is set up properly, what it's going to do, and he's not, it would just ask you to, it would just do it automatically. If you're set up properly on GitHub, and there's ways of setting up so that it never asks you for this stuff again, it'll send all the information up like this. Okay, so you may have to log in. That's like actually a good example, because you may have to log in just like that, put in your username and password, and then go up like that.
If you're on a lab machine, obviously you're going to have to log in. If you're
Yeah.
using your own machine and you've installed the client, you may have it configured already. So
That's
you're
right.
not prompted.
Are you with me? No? Too fast? We're going to do it again. That's why I'm telling you. This is the first time we're doing it with command prompt, and then I'm going to show you why it's better to use Git shell. Way better, right? And by the way, there's other shells or ways of getting into to Git and do your Git stuff that are better than Git shell. They give you more information and all this kind of stuff. Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. Okay, so we've done this. How do I know that it's done, right? So I'm going to go back over here, right? And I'm going to kind of skim to the left here. And if you notice, I'm kind of just refresh my screen. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to refresh the repo, and if everything does well, it goes well. Look, I have my index.html, and it also notes that I have one commit. So I have one commit. Here's my index.html. If I click on the commit, right, it's going to show me initial commit, authored 9 minutes ago, right? So I did my initial commit. I created my commit or snapshot on the command line, and then I pushed my commit. I threw my commit up into the onto GitHub, onto the cloud. Okay, so that's the steps. Command line first, and then you've made a GitHub repo, and then you kind of connect them. The other way to do it is like you might think, hey, wait, isn't it intuitive to do the GitHub repo first and then the command line after? We'll do that piece as well. Okay, well, there's many ways to do this. It's just amount of trying this out and understanding which way is more comfortable for you. Go ahead.
If we think about really how this works, if we think about when we're building web pages and we're uploading to a server, really it's a similar process. So this line, when we're calling remote add, this is basically the FTP equivalent of connecting to a server by FTP. We haven't put the files up, we're just getting connected from our local machine to a remote machine. That's really what the Git remote add is doing. We're linking our local repository to the repository we created on GitHub. And then the push is really the equivalent of doing an FTP upload. Instead of using FTP though, we're using Git. So push will transfer local files to the cloud on GitHub. And just like you can imagine, we have a push command, we can also download stuff from GitHub. So I'm working together with Doug. Doug puts files on his GitHub. I need a copy so I can issue a pull command, which would be similar to doing a download in FTP.
And I like that thinking. So let's do a pull command, and let's have something to pull, right? So we're going to go back one step. We're going to go back to this view, right, where we see the commit and the master branch, by the way, what you see here. And you also see the index.html. But down here, you see there's an area that we didn't add a README file. So let's add a README file now to the repo, but we're going to do that on the cloud. So we're going to add a README file on the cloud as if someone had pushed up a README file already. Let's say I was working with Rich. Rich pushed up a README file, and we're going to do that kind of simulation now. So let's say here's a README file. So add a README. And if you notice on the top, it just has this hashtag with repo, right? The hashtag is equivalent to a heading 1 or H1 in HTML. It kind of makes it really big, a big heading, right? So we can say repo1. You can kind of comment on what it is, and you can also make a subheading or whatever with 2 hashtags. If you wanted to do a subheading on heading 2, as an example, you can do that. And you can also put some more information about this repo, like this repo. This is a test repo for use with command line, as an example, whatever you want, right? Now on the bottom, this is a new file that I'm adding in here, right? So if you notice, it's going to be, this is the path, repo1/readme.md. MD stands for? Markdown is the way it stands for, right? So it's not a markup file, HTML, it's a markdown file, which is slightly different. All right, let's go to here. So now I got to this place where I'm going to commit this new file. I can accept the default kind of commits a message here, which says create readme.md. I could do that. And I can add additional information here if I want to. I'm just going to click commit new file, and what it's going to do is this is the new commit that's going to come up. Okay, I'm not going to change that. And press commit new file. All right, now I have a readme file. So I have a readme.md plus an index.html, and then if you notice down here, I've got this description of my repo. And this is a really useful thing to put up for your repos. So that way you know, and people know if they're looking at it. Let's say, for example, Rich is taking a look at your repo, or I am. You know, what's this repo for? Is it for assignment 1? Is it for, what is it? Is it a lab? You know, describe what your repo is about.
And generally you'll find when developers, more and more developers are putting code modules, code libraries on GitHub for use, so they'll use the README file as the documentation. You know, here's a code library I want to use. The README is going to show up as soon as you load the repo under the list of files. It'll tell you how to use that code library.
Make sense? So I've got this extra README file, which means I'm a commit behind locally. On the cloud, I'm on track, right? But locally, I don't have the README file, and there's a second commit. If you notice now, there's 2 commits right here. Each of these commits has a commit number, right? If you look on the right, there's a commit number that's associated with these 2 things, right? And I'm a commit behind. I don't have this one, so I need to get it. So in order for me to do that, if I'm working with somebody else, the safe thing to do, and again, this is a workflow thing, best practices would say, before I do a push, I should do a pull, right? So let's say I'm working, I want to do a git pull. Right? This looks pretty simple, right? There's other things you can do here, other additional little switches you can use in the command line, along with the pull to override certain things or whatever. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to do a git pull and press enter. And if things go well, it's going to pull the file down. And if you notice, it pulled down the README file, right, into our Git repository now. And if I do a git status, right, everything is clean. If I do a git log, I see 2 commits. One that we just made up online, right? And the other one we did locally. But we have both files. So to prove that, we're going to go back into our local folder, right? Here's repo 1. And if you notice, I've got both my files here. So you see, this is an organic thing that we're doing, right? It's not something that we just do locally. It's not something that we just do on the cloud. We use both folder and cloud repo, GitHub. Okay, and we're able to sync those 2 things up, so that way, A, we can share files, 2, we have a backup, 3, we can collaborate, and so on and so on. Okay, we can also compare changes between commits. Yes.
I'm assuming pull overwrites any existing files as well.
No.
Or does it only look for new files?
Here's the thing: what happens if you have some other? Let's say I have another commit. So I've done a commit, and you've done a commit. One that's online. And this is where it gets complex. You've done a README file, and meanwhile, I've done another local commit. Now we got a problem. Why is there a problem? I'm out of sync, right? And what has to happen, I have to do a merge, right? And we're not going to talk about that today. The best practice workflows, because it's a little bit more complex. The best practice workflows is for if you're working with a partner, and you may work on a partner and on your project at the end of the day, right? Work like this. Work on 2 different things, so they don't clash. Number 1, that's the first rule. Second thing is, if you're going to work together on the same stuff, same part of your web project, whatever it's going to be, right? Check in and check out. So you have a file, you work on your stuff, I'm done, go, right? And maybe that's what has to happen sometimes, to make it simple. If you don't do that and you work the other way, and there's ways of working, you can get complexities, and that's why I'm answering your question with not quite like that, right? You'd have to do a merge, and you'd have to accept whose commit is the one that you want to accept, right? So be careful with this. It can mess you up in some ways. The alternative to this is creating a second branch. Right now we only have 1 branch called master. You can create a second branch and then later on merge them together. But we'll talk about that later.
If you want, on GitHub itself, let me just go here for a second. In the documentation, they describe, so if you go into these, there's a couple quick tutorials. So that was the basic for, you know, how to create. So we've kind of done this, but they also describe forking, and there's a sample you can go through. So there's a sample code repository which you can download. So you can take this from another developer. They show you how to get a local copy and, you know, create a local, make changes and sync. So I suggest it's a good idea to walk through this. You can do that on your own time, but it gives you some idea of taking a project off the cloud, making changes, and how you sync it up. It's kind of in here.
So Git is like, it's not just one thing. There's 2 pieces to it. We use Git and GitHub for revision control, right? There's both pieces. The local repository now, we've talked about that just as a review, and the remote repository, the cloud repository, right? They're not automatically synced. And we can't automatically tell. Whether you're in Visual Studio or you're working in brackets or another IDE, you can't automatically tell. There's something that you're behind. So the safe thing to do is pull first, right before you do a sync, before you start working on your files. And have an agreement with somebody else that if you're working with one other person, to keep it simple, I'm saying. And this, yes, it can be done different ways. Okay, this is the command line view. Let's do another one. So I know I went fast. I'm going to do it again, right, to give you guys another chance to see it. All right, let's try this out. I'm going to close this down. I'm going to kind of minimize this piece because I want this again. Right, and I want to use this time the Git shell, which is found when you install your application, your local app here. All right, so here's Git shell. Oops, the wrong one. Here's Git shell. This one. It looks like command prompt, yeah? There's a little bit of a change. Okay, let's do another repo. So we're going to do the same thing for people who aren't comfortable with Windows and installing folders and stuff, and there may be people like that, and it's okay. We're going to go right-click here, and we're going to create a new repo. Let's do this again from scratch, guys. So it's a good practice. So follow me, please don't watch. This is not a you watch, I do. This is you do with me kind of thing, right? So that way you guys get comfortable doing this, right? So please get into your stuff. If you've already downloaded your client, which should be on your systems in front of you, then you should have this Git shell, and it should function.
And anything you guys are going to give to us for marks, you're going to have to go through this process. Create a repository in the cloud, create it locally, put your files, save your files locally, and then push them. So we want you to be comfortable with doing this.
So you said Git shell comes with GitHub desktop?
Yes.
It does. Yeah.
Should be in the menu, under the Git menu.
If not, you can always download if you're really someone who's, you know.
So you go to the programs menu for a sec. Let's go if we expand.
GitHub.
Yeah, so when you expand, now this is not a lab machine, but when you expand the GitHub under the programs menu, you should have both Git shell should be the first item, and GitHub should be the GUI client. So we're using the Git shell for now. It should be on the lab machines as well.
Okay, if it's not, worst case scenario, what you could do is you could download Windows PowerShell, which is really what Git shell is all about, right? So if you look up Windows PowerShell on Google, you can download it. It's a better command prompt, and actually, it's included in Windows 10, if I'm not wrong, right? So, sorry.
Isn't it included in 7?
It depends on the system, which version of 7 you have, right? Okay, let's go back. So now the great thing is, if I use, I'm just going to start this off again. If I use Git shell, and if it works properly, here it is. Again, it's taking me right back into the GitHub, where GitHub is installed in the system. But that's not going to help me, right? I want to create a new folder, so I'm going to go New on the desktop folder, and we're going to make this repo 2. Let's do that. We're going to do kind of the same thing, same process. I'm going to kind of go into the folder itself, right-click into the folder, go New. I'm going to another text file. Here's another text document. We'll do the same document, index.html. So you've seen this before a couple times, right? And maybe, you know what, we'll add another one just to make it a little slightly different. We'll go New, a new text document, and we'll put in there, I don't know, some kind of app.js file, just to make it a little different. So we can see that there's 2 files. Okay, there we go. We got a couple files. And so we have an app.js file and an index.html file. They're both in there. And we want to, you know, create a repo for us, right, for ourselves. So the steps are very similar, but actually they're identical. But let's take a look what this Windows PowerShell gives us as opposed to what we had before. So again, how do I get in there for those people? I showed you 2 ways of getting in there. What's the better way to get in there if I was going to navigate to the path where this repo is? Anybody? I just showed you one time, yeah.
Just open up the repo, copy the path.
Well, you don't have to open it, right? Yeah.
You said, like, you just say
CD for change directory, and then drag and drop, right? That's all I have to do. CD, drag and drop, right? And then press enter, bam. So I'm in the repo now. And now instead of using dir, directory, I can use my Linux commands, ls, all right? Which is one right there, much better, right? Okay, not only can I do ls, but I can do ls minus al, right? And if you notice al not found, that's okay, don't worry about that. Let's go back to this, ls, here we go. Let's look at this now. I want to make a repo, right? So what's the first thing, what's the first command? I just showed you this earlier. What's the first command I make to initialize the repo? Git init. Okay, that's good. Git init. Oh, I made a mistake. Let's try this again. Git init. All right, there we go. Oh, look what this. Well, look what I get here. I get something called master. I get +2. I get some other kind of marks that tell me something's not right. What do these marks mean? It means on the left that I got some uncommitted changes. That's what it means. And there's 2 files that I haven't committed. Make sense? So PowerShell gives you some feedback that tells you something needs to be done, right? That's why, number 1, it's way better than just regular command prompt. Okay, number 1. All right, let's do the next thing. So what's the next step? I've added my commit. Ari, what's the next one? What do I do next? Ari, I'm going to pick on you today because you did the fist thing. Go. You don't know. I do need to do what? Anyone else? Yes. I've already initialized it. Yes. I have to add the files. That's the next piece. So I have to add everything into my files. I have 2 files that have not been added. Let's add them in. So I'm going to go git add dot. That's the syntax, right? Hey, now it's green. It means all my files, yes, they've been added, but I have 2 uncommitted changes. Okay, that's the next step. So you see, you've went from red to green. Okay, I need to get this to blue. All right, and we'll talk about this in a second. Okay, what's the next step? One more step here. Yes, I'll pick somebody else. Yes.
Commit.
I have to make a commit, right? I have to record my snapshot that I'm making for my files, right, locally. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say git commit -m, and then I'm going to name my commit, right? And again, last time I said initial commit, another good best practice is first commit. You can do either one, and it's fine.
As you can probably figure out, that -m flag stands for message.
There you go.
Right, so it's just a parameter that's required by the commit function. You can't commit without a message.
Okay.
It'll allow you to.
Just remove that.
Say it might be a good idea to show what happens if you commit without the message. That might
Sure,
be
I can do that next time. I'll do that the next time next round. Okay. Anyone? Are we up to date with this one? Did anyone not understand this? You're good. You're not good. Am I going too fast again?
No, I don't have the Git shell.
You don't have Git shell.
No, I got the GitHub desktop, but for some reason it's not bringing up Git shell.
That's
so
okay.
There I kind of lost you.
No problem. So this is what we're going to do. For you to get Git shell, I'm just going to go up here. I want to find PowerShell. So I'm going to say on, let's say Chrome. You can do something like this. Download PowerShell.
Macs don't have PowerShell.
If you don't have PowerShell, if you're using a Mac,
Yeah.
okay, great, even better. You don't need Git shell. You can just use terminal
Okay.
if you're on a Mac, right? So if you use terminal, Git shell is your terminal, right? It's even better than Git shell. I'm sorry to say that for people who are non-Mac users, but really, terminal is loaded with features that regular command prompt. Because remember, command prompt is based on the old DOS command, right? And it's, it doesn't have the same, it's not feature packed like terminal is. Whether you're on Linux, because remember Mac is a Linux-based operating system, right? On the back end. So if you're Linux or Mac, you've got terminal. Terminal is better than PowerShell. PowerShell is probably the next greatest thing, but if you don't have it, you can always download something like download Windows PowerShell. If you just go up to, if you don't have it, you can do this. And you can always download Windows PowerShell from, you can find a link as an example, different links on how to do that. Okay, I'm not going to do that in this particular session because we don't have time to do it. Okay, cool. So we've got this. Stay with me, guys. Stay with me. We've got this thing now. We've made our commits and everything else. I'm not done though. What do I need to do now? What's the next step? I've got my commits following the same steps. I can't push. Why can't I push? I don't have a repo, right? I need to create a repo on the cloud, right? Okay, so let's go do that with Rich's fine repositories here. So I'm going to go back a couple steps. Okay, that's you. All right, good. And we're going to go back to the right where we have this plus, and I'm going to create a new repo. I'm going to call this repo 2. I'll make it a capital. Oh, I'll make it a lowercase just to make it the same. Repo 2. And again, I'm just going to do the same thing. Just press enter, and if it's cool, then repo 2 is entered, and I've got this git line here. It's actually a URI. That's what it is. It's like a URL, but it's almost like a path to the repo. That's what it is, right? It's called the URI. This is cool, right? And again, next time we're going to do the third one. We're going to do a setup in desktop. Maybe I'll let you do that one, right? The setup in desktop, or I can continue. Yeah. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to copy this line here, right? I'm going to copy it. Now watch what I do in PowerShell. When I go to PowerShell, I right click, right, and paste just like normal, and then enter. We didn't do anything different, right? We connected the remote repository by doing this git remote add. Why am I not typing this one? I'll tell you why, right? Not because I'm lazy, by the way. but because it's a really good chance you'll make finger typing errors when you add in your repo. Why? It's a longer thing you have to type. https://github.com and then blah, blah, blah. Why? If you can have it, if you have this ready, this is the one thing that I recommend highly to reduce errors, to copy and paste. The rest, not so difficult. What's the next step? I've done my remote, connected my remote. Now what I need to do? Someone said push. I need to push, right? So I'm going to do git push -u for unconditional, right? Origin master, if I can type properly in the keyboard, right? Origin means this is where I'm coming from. Master is the master branch, all right? And press enter. If Rich is set up properly, right, then he doesn't have to log in, right? And because I'm using Git shell, I don't have to log in, right? Because it's connected to the to your Git tool that you downloaded, and then away I go. Here I'm done, right? All right, let's go back and check to see if it's all good. I always do a kind of a combination. I push and then I check, right? Just to make sure that I can, that everything is good. And if you notice here, I've got two files, app.js and index.html. Let's add a README like we did last time. Okay, so I'm adding a README. I'm not going to change anything in the README now to type because you've already seen what I'm going to type there. And I'm just going to press commit new file, right? But hey, wait a minute. How come I can't commit new file here? How come? Right? Even though I've got this in here, right? I can't commit new file. How come? I haven't made any changes, right? Unless I make a change, and even though the README doesn't exist, it won't accept it. The bare minimum you have to do is actually do something in here, like add a space, right? Or accept the change that the minimum is here. So by pressing enter, I've got to make a change. Worst case scenario. You can always update your README file, by the way. It's not permanent. It won't be. It won't stay like that forever if you don't want it to. It's just another file, and commit new file. Once I've done that, my README file is up, right? And I gotta sync it up because I'm one behind down here. Now look, I can't tell. If I do a git status, it's not connected, right? I can't tell that I'm behind. If I get a git log, I only see my local repo or my local commit here. I don't see that I have a commit online. It's not connected, right? I connect and I disconnect, right? So next step, what do? I need to get in sync with what I've got online. What's the command that I use? Karen, what's the command that I use? No problem. How about the girl in the back? I don't know your name.
I'm behind as well.
You're behind as well, right? Anybody have, what do I do next? I need to sync up. I need to pull. Thank you. I need to do a git pull, right? And then what it does is it goes online, sees that I have a README file, and pulls it down. Okay, cool, right? And if I do a git log now, git log, it shows me both of my commits. And again, if I check my local repositories here, which is repo number 2, I can see that I also have my README file online, right? So again, it seems like a lot of steps. Really, it's not that many steps. You just initialize your repo, you add all your files to your repo, you make your first commit, right? You create your GitHub repository online, right? You connect your repositories together, local and remote, right? And then you push everything up to the remote repo. That's really it in a nutshell, right? Okay, let's do it one more time, but we'll do it with the tool. Yeah. Git update? Yeah. Is there a Git update?
Yeah.
Let's check it out. How do I know what commands I can do in Git? If I just type Git and I press enter, I have all these different commands that come up, right? These are all the commands I have. Git add, bisect, branch, checkout, clone, and so on, right? Is there a Git update in there? No. There's no Git update. And by the way, you'll be using a lot of these commands. If you can't remember the commands I've said, you can always go and say Git by itself, and it'll come up with a list of commands, right? And this is it'll tell you what to do. If you have a problem, it'll come up with errors. If you mess up, what happens if you mess up? Worst case scenario, and sometimes it happens. Sometimes you're disconnected or behind. There's lots of tutorials online. There's tons of help that you can find online by just doing a Google search on how to merge and pull and push and connect and all that kind of stuff. It's not a difficult process. And again, why are we making you do this? Number 1, best practice. Number 2, collaboration. Number 3, you want to do file comparison, right? Number 4, a backup. Your dog didn't eat your homework and it didn't kill your laptop, right? You got your stuff online somewhere. I'm sorry to say it that way. But those are the main reasons why we do these things, right? Okay, one more time we're going to do it with the tool now, and I want to show you how easy it is with the tool. All right? So you have your tool downloaded. This is the assumption, okay? I'm going to go to Git this time. All right, so I'm going to go back to Git. And up on Git, oops, I went into the commit. Up on Git, I'm going to add in another repo, right? We're going to make it repo 3, by the way. You can get rid of these if you want later on. I'm going to add another repo, create a new repo, right, for my for Rich here, and we're going to call it repo 3. Okay, we're starting on the command line, or starting on GitHub this time. Repo 3. We'll make it a public repo again, and again, private. You can use private if you pay, right, or if you have that special Git pack that comes from DreamSpark, right? Because you get a certain amount of private repos. I don't know how many you get.
You have 5 private repositories.
5 private repos.
If you get to sign up for the student pack.
Let's initialize this one with a README since we're starting from here, right? Might as well do that. And we're also going to add a git ignore file. Why not, right? And we'll make it so that I can choose what I want to ignore. Like, for example, I want to ignore node modules, right? Node underscore modules, right? It's okay if it's not there. Node, let me see if I can do Node.js. And if not, we can we'll modify that later. Was it there?
Oh, maybe not.
It is.
Oh, it is there. No.
All right, so I want to do this, okay? And I want to add an MIT license. What the hell, right? Since I'm going to publish my lovely repository, and I want people to use it again and give them permission. All right, I'm going to create my repository here. So I did a couple changes here. So I've got a few files now online, and if you notice, there are a few files: a license file, a readme.md file, and a git ignore file. If I click on the git ignore file, it tells me what I'm ignoring, and adds in a bunch of stuff into my node when I do my node stuff that kind of removes things that I don't want to put up on GitHub. Like, for example, grunt files and other kinds of other stuff. It's kind of useful, and here's node modules, which is what I wanted, right? I don't want my node modules to go up on GitHub because there's thousands of them. Like, literally, it's gonna, and they're useless. You never want to put your node modules on GitHub. Okay, so let's go back. So I've got this stuff, but now I want to clone this repository somewhere else. How do I do that? Well, if you scroll down here, you notice there's clone and desktop, right? You can also download the zip file and set it up, and then kind of sync it up after, right? That's totally fine too. But this is the way to do it, right? Click this. If I do it properly, and if I have my my repository open, or my little Git tool here, I can choose the directory I wish to clone my repo 3 into. Well, guess what? I'm going to put it into my desktop, right? And press OK, because that's where I have all the other ones. We're done. Let's go into our tool here, and there it is. There's repo 3. I've got my git ignore, my license, and my readme.md. And if I want to go and check the desktop, so let's look at the desktop here for a second, right? Here's my repo 3. I didn't do it. I didn't create it, but there's all my files. I don't know to you, but to me, that's a time saver, right? 2 seconds and you're done, right? You don't have to do all the command line stuff and everything else. Yes?
So how come 1 and 2 don't show up on
Oh, that's a very good question. I'll answer that right now. The reason why 1 and 2 don't show up here is because my Git tool hasn't scanned to detect them. Let's scan to detect them. So I'm going to go to this little gear here, click onto it, right? And if I go to repository settings, if I'm not wrong, I can, where it says, if I'm not wrong, I think it's maybe not repository settings, or is it options? Might be under options. Options. If I go under options, I can scan for repositories here, right? There it is. If I scan for repositories, it's going to search the system for repositories, and it's found some, right? And I don't have to include all the other ones, right? Let's say I don't want to include all these ones on the OneDrive there, right? So I'm going to kind of unclick those. But I want to include these 2, right? I can click add, and what it's going to do now is it's going to start tracking those repositories as well, right? Click save. I'm going to track those repositories, and what it does is it gives you, this is why it's so good to use a tool, right? It gives you a graphic representation of your repositories, right? So here's, look at repo 1. Repo 1, if I look at it, it shows you a map here of the main branch with a couple of the latest commit. Here's your first commit, the initial commit, 36 minutes ago when we started this demo, right? And here's the new one. Not to me. I know that people don't like command line, and if you don't like it, this is a great alternative, right? Still has a lot of power, a lot of things you can do here. And if you notice one thing it does on the top, it tells you there's no uncommitted changes, right? It talks to you about the master branch. You can switch to different branches. You can do all kinds of things on the tool. You can make a comparison between the two files or the two commits, anything you want. Same thing with repo number 2, right? And here's repo number 3. So it gives you a view of all your repos from a graphical perspective. Okay, now that we have this up, let's make a change to the repo. Because I've added repo number 1 and repo number 2, because you mentioned that, hey, how come I can't see them? And your name again? Alex, because Alex said, right? That's what we're going to say on the video, right? Because Alex said, right? We're going to go through and make a change to our local repositories and see what the desktop app does for us. This is another thing it does for us. It watches what we do. So let's add another file here in my repo 1. So I'm going to go new, and I'm going to go to text document. And inside there, I'm going to change this to an app.js, which we don't have, right? App.js, okay? And accept that change. Again, these are empty, right? Let's go back to the tool now and see what happens. Okay, if I look at repo 1, right? Hey, look, there's one change. App.js is added in. It notices that there's one uncommitted change. All right, cool. I want to make a commit. How do I do that, right? How would you recommend that I do this change, right? Well, there's one change. I got one uncommitted change. It tells me what it is. Here's a summary, and here's my description. And right here, it's ready for me to make a commit, right? So this is the way, I mean, it's so simple. As soon as it notices a change, and I can make many, many changes to the file. And instead of doing it with command line, and I can do it right here. I can say added, here's a great way of doing it. And this is what the kind of changes, when we mark a commit, we want to kind of simplify and kind of give a name to what we're doing, why we're doing a snapshot. And there's going to be a question from the floor that's going to say, so how often do I need to make a commit? And I'll answer that question in a second. Added app.js, right? I'm not going to add a more complicated description. You could, and that's where you add it in there. This is kind of a summary. This is a kind of an in-detailed or in-depth description of what you've done, if you've done many more changes in one little commit. And press commit to master. Okay, cool. I've got a commit to master, but look what the graphic representation is showing here. I've got 2 commits that are synced up and 1 commit that's not in sync. So how do I do that? Sync. It's really simple. I sync up, it connects with GitHub, and then I want to wait till that circle goes like a solid circle, and then we're good to go. If everything is set up properly on the system, it should really be a no-brainer. Let's see what happens. There it is. Yeah.
So if you're working on a repository with somebody else, and you make changes, and they're making changes at the same time.
Bad. Okay, well, not bad, but it can lead to complexity. All right. So we're going to do maybe another session when we talk about that. We're going to try and do that. I'm going to have my laptop here, and Rich is going to have his laptop here. We're going to connect together, and what's going to happen is I'm going to make some changes, and he's not going to know about them, and we're going to run into trouble. Let's see what happens. Right? We just don't have time to do that in this session. Right? Any questions around this stuff? I know I might have gone fast, but I need to cover this in the 40 minutes or so that I'm with you guys, right? So that's why, right? Again, it's recorded on, the great thing is it's recorded on online. Let's do a refresh here.
Yeah, so
Go to Git, what is that? And there we go. You can see that there's 3 commits now and app.js is up there, right? Any questions around this? All right, so one more question to you guys. When do you think it's good to do a commit? How often? Every time, once in a while, once a year? How about the girl in the back?
Every time, because you want to back up your files, don't you, Michael?
Michael, do you lose your files? Who's Michael? Michael? The guy drinking the coffee in the back, right? Michael, what do you think? Should you do it every time? Or is there another interval you think is the best? I like your thinking. After every major change. There's nothing wrong with doing a bunch of commits, right? There's nothing wrong with and sorry, the girl in the back?
Alex.
Alex again? Alex and Alex. All right, good. Alex, I like your thinking too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really coming up with your own workflow, right? What I'm comfortable with, and I think what we want to see at least, is every major change at least, okay? At the very minimum, like Mike's saying, right? But I like your thinking. I like when you do a change, and if you've made a change to a file, you push it up, or you at least make a commit. You may not have to push it up to GitHub, but a commit locally is great. Why? Oh my God, something's not working. I broke my build. I don't know what I did. That's why, right? So I can revert, and you can do that with GitHub. You can revert back to a previous time, right? You can also compare one commit to the other. You can't do that if there's no commits, right? So that's why I recommend doing it, commit often, right? It's almost like saving often. Think about saving locally. We're saving. But if you save it and it's messed up, a messed up save, right? Commit, you can always go back. So that's it for me. I don't know if you want to continue from there.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions, at least about the basics of using Git?
I know I ran a little too fast for you guys, right?
When you make a local commit, and then when you sync that up with GitHub, is there any way to, say you do a local commit like really, really often, but you don't want to sync all those up to GitHub?
Yeah.
Because it gets confusing when you have numbers.
It doesn't get confusing, but yeah, you can sync and you can commit and push as often as you like, right? If you don't want to push to GitHub because you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of internet access, right? You're on a train and your internet access is limited, or you have a limited bandwidth. You want to do it one time. That might be a reason why. Sometimes you want to work locally and maybe fix some of your commits before you put them up. That's another good reason why, right? But typically, it's really around your workflow. And some companies will insist on a pattern or workflow that makes sense for them, from the best practices for the business. Because remember, when you guys are programmers out there, right, one of your objectives is to reduce the amount of rework you have, right? More rework, bad on your performance review, right? So if you make mistakes a lot, right, and if you don't have some kind of backup, and I'm not talking, like I said, like a local backup that's done with Visual Studio or brackets or whatever you're using, but literally like a backup like this, that's bad. And also from a shareability perspective, sometimes your senior developer or whatever wants to do a code review, and sometimes they do it on the spot. So they do a code review of your stuff and look in and go, what are you doing, right? Ari, what's going on, right? How come your code is like, it's kind of brute force here, right? As an example, right? You could have done this better. Maybe you could have simplified. I see a lot of duplication here. Sometimes they do that kind of stuff, right? It's their job. It's what they get paid for, and they want to see it. So that's why it's always good to commit. I like Alex's idea: commit and push often. Right?
At the very least, another workflow is make sure at the end of the when you're done working at the end of the day, you push. Right? Your house burns down, your laptop gets stolen. Well, at least what I've done up to the end of today is up there. If I lose my work halfway through the day, at least I have yesterday's on GitHub, right? So I should never lose more than a day's worth of work, ever. I would push at minimum at the end of every day.
Can you, or would you ever delete a commit?
Yes, I could and I would, right? And it really depends if the commit is a bad commit.
Right, yeah.
Right? You can revert. When you revert back, commit's gone, right? And we'll talk about that another day. We'll try another little bit. We'll have maybe these sample repos will keep up. And I don't know if you agree. And then what we'll do is later on we'll mess something up. And we want to get rid of that before we push, right? Or merge, or doing one of these kind of more complicated maneuvers.
I've done it. Simple one is I published something that I meant to put in git ignore, right? It contained security information. So I pushed that, well, that commit's there. It's on GitHub, right? You can see it in my list. So somebody can go into my commits, find my old commit, browse it at this point, and bang, there's a file that I didn't mean to put up. Yeah. So I want to be able to pull that, either that entire commit or part of that commit offline. Yes, you can do it.
Or if you send up pictures, let's say you have a lot of copyrighted pictures that you use that are local, you don't want to share them. You have a site, you want to leave your site files up, but your images are huge, right? Why would you put them up? Unless you're making some kind of change that you want to record and compare images from one state to the next. Something also we stopped doing. We don't do images on the web, or audio files, any kind of bitmaps, large images and large files like that. It doesn't make sense, right? Unless somehow you want to track those or whatever, right? Because that means everyone has access to that, and that you're doing it every single time. So your Git repository is going to become huge, massive, right? Yeah.
Are you able to ignore more than one type of thing? Yeah.
Absolutely. You can ignore as many things. You can make your own custom ignore file. And you can modify the ignore file, so you can ignore things like if you're a Mac user, and you have a lot of times Mac also has these .ds_store, right, files that kind of come along with your folder. You want to ignore those, right? So otherwise you get all these extra files that you don't need, right? So that kind of stuff is what you want to do. You want to add that into your ignore file. One other note before I go. How about this fork thing we have on the top here, right? What do you do when you want it with this fork, right? You guys did this before?
No, but that's in the tutorial that I'm suggesting they have a look at.
So this is what this is the segue that we're going to go to next, right? So we're going to talk about how to fork and why to fork, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So I'll leave that to you.
Okay.
And well, I'll see you guys next week, right? But that's your little intro to Git, if you will. Might be a great place to stop recording and all that kind of stuff as well. All right. Take care, guys. See you next week.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we're gonna leave Git for today. So not time for a break yet. It's 5:02. So what we need to do, we need to do a little bit of a primer on JavaScript. Okay. Now some of you may have seen I gave you a link. I sent out an email with a link, which hopefully some of you had a look at. If not, good idea on your own time. Really good, quick little lesson. I'm not going to go through it now, but I'm just going to show you. A free tutorial on Code School on JavaScript. The entire course is quite long. The first few levels of it are free. It's a really good primer. You code online. It tells you what's wrong with your code, etc. Kind of, you do it all online and debug. So gives you a bunch of challenges. There's a few videos. The videos are like 5 to 7 minutes long. So I would strongly recommend, if you, where can you go to get some more practice with JavaScript? Right here. So that link is there. Reg?
I'm just going to say codeacademy.com has a really good JavaScript course too. It's free.
Yep, they do. And actually, you're going to go through part of it today. I thought, I looked at it and I thought I was in the process of creating the lesson and some exercises, and I actually looked there and I thought this is a great exercise, so I'm actually going to have you do one of the Code Academy exercises in class today.
And Ari sent me a link last night to a good book actually on JavaScript.
Okay.
So it's actually fast-paced and it's pretty legible, to be honest with
Okay.
you. It was JavaScript, the good parts.
Okay, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
So a few other things that are on here. We'll come back to this. In terms of style, JavaScript style for Node.js, we'll maybe come back to that. Probably that may have to wait for next week. So a bit about JavaScript, because you guys really haven't done much JavaScript at all. So we're going to go through some of the basics. If you can open up a browser tab, I put this link here. There's a link that says Online JS Console. So there's a few different places that we can write JavaScript and play around with it. You can do it through the browser. So if you're in Firefox, if you just go through the menu, if you have the developer tools, and go to Web Console, you get this JavaScript console here. Chrome has a similar thing, which you can use. But again, it's just down at the bottom. So under Chrome, if you go to More Tools and Developer Tools, actually, where is it? Sorry.
It's actually,
Oops.
you were in the right spot.
Yeah, I was. I clicked the wrong thing.
It's like you see the double arrow
Profiles.
at the top there, just to the left, like that's like a drop down menu.
Is
Just
that
up.
the 8 warnings thing?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's here. So console. So you can also write your JavaScript here. I find easier if you just click on. So you can use either of those in your browser. If you just click this link, you basically get this. Sorry, here it is. jsbin.com. So online JavaScript. So it will debug and run our JavaScript in real time in the browser, which is kind of neat. Okay. So by default, when you go here, it's got the HTML tab enabled. And it's also got this checkbox auto run JS. I'm going to get rid of the HTML. I'm going to just click on the JavaScript tab. And I'm going to uncheck auto run JS. I want to type my commands and I'll run them. But when I feel like running them, I don't want the editor to run it for me. Okay? So as I go through, I've got some slides. This is a presentation Tom put together a little while ago. And when we get to code samples, I'll kind of jump back over here and we can actually run the code and see what it's doing. So JavaScript has been around for quite a while. Believe it or not, JavaScript was created in about 10 days in 1995. Developers sat down, created it, and 20 years later, we're still using it. In fact, we're probably using JavaScript more now than ever before in terms of the web. So in terms of syntax, I'll just make this a little bigger. Syntax is going to be familiar to you guys. Obviously, syntax is based on C, so it's got all the same kind of language features you're used to seeing with things like Java, PHP, C#. Okay. So white space is ignored by the JavaScript compiler, which is nice. So you can use tabs, you can use spaces. Doesn't really matter. Okay. And in some cases, statements do terminate with semicolons. In some cases, the interpreter may sort of assume a semicolon is there. So the syntax is going to be nothing new. Some of the important points, and I can guarantee there's going to be some exam questions about this. JavaScript's case sensitive, right? So just like in PHP, just like in Java, your variables, your functions, all of your object names, all of those things are case sensitive. So white space gets ignored and semicolons terminate. Nothing new. We can split statements over multiple lines, which is helpful. And obviously we have the either you love them or you hate them. Personally, I hate them, but we have the curly brace syntax. This should be nothing new to you guys, right? You've been programming in Java for a while now. And we'll look a little bit later at this style guide. So particularly when we're using JavaScript on the server with Node, there are no hard and fast rules about style, but this is a pretty good guide as to conventions that Node developers have used. Typically, particularly in Node, we use Camel Case. So lowercase for the first word and then first letter capitals for things like variable names, function names, object names. We're going to use Camel Case. You don't have to. You can use underscore notation, but none of the code samples you see in any Node.js resource, anything with the mean stack is going to use underscore notation. They're all going to use Camel Case. So I'm going to use it. I would recommend you do as well. Okay. Same kind of rules for Java for identifiers. So variable names, function names, class names, letters, numbers, underscore, and dollar signs only. Numbers can't be the first character. Okay. And again, case sensitive, any name, and you can't use a reserved word. Like you can't create a variable called else, for example, in JavaScript, just like you couldn't do it in Java. So we want to try to avoid for properties and methods using these reserved words. And I think actually somewhere in here we've got a list of those. Okay. So samples of valid, variable function names would be things like this. So we can use a dollar sign. And again, we'll tend to use Camel Case with the first word all lowercase and then caps for any subsequent words. You can use this syntax if you want. I know I preferred to use it in PHP, but not in JavaScript applications. I wouldn't recommend it. So you can use what you want, but just be consistent. And I think I've mentioned here, that's our Node standard. Okay, I'm not going to read through all of this stuff. You can read it on your own. So here we did also throw in a list of reserved words. So these are words you can't use for your own identifiers. Okay, they're all built in part of the language. And a lot of these you're familiar with anyway. So just like in Java, now JavaScript isn't fully object-oriented, but we can create objects that have properties and methods, and we use the same syntax where we would use our object name. We use dot notation. So the name of our object, the name of our method, and any parameters, or we want to reference a property, we want to read a property value, it's going to be object.property. Okay. JavaScript is loosely typed in general, unlike in Java. Okay. So this is a question from 8 months ago. What the heck does that mean? What's the difference between a loosely typed language and a strongly typed language? Ed?
You have to declare the type of like variables or primitive data types that you're making.
You got it. So if we create a first name variable in Java, you're going to have to define that that variable is a string. Okay, in JavaScript, we're simply just going to declare a variable called first name. We don't declare what the type of variable is. Sorry?
All numbers are just an integer.
Yeah, we'll come to the, oh, you've been reading ahead. So basically, we have a numeric data type, and it will hold, so we don't have separate integer and decimal one single numeric that can hold either types. Okay. So our basic types, we've got number, we've got Boolean, we've got floating point numbers, and we've got strings. So we can use the same kind of math operators, and in terms of order of precedence, really all the same rules apply in JavaScript that would apply in Java or any other programming language. So rules like parentheses first, etc. I think we threw up a few examples here of these operators. So we've got modulus, and again, we've got plus, plus, and minus, minus for adding or subtracting. This is nothing new. You guys have used these in Java. We use them a little bit in PHP as well. Okay. So here's our order of precedence. Again, JavaScript is no different than anything else. They didn't reinvent the wheel here. Okay. So to declare a variable, we just use the keyword var. So I'm going to create a first name variable. It's just going to be var space first name, and that first name variable is going to be case sensitive. Okay, I don't have to declare it as a string. In fact, if you declare it as a string, you're going to get an error. If you write var first name as string, JavaScript compiler is going to give you an error. So some simple examples here of how some of the data types work and some simple math operations. Just like in Java, we also have plus equals, minus equals, times equals. What do these operators mean? You maybe haven't used them for a while. So for example, here we've got subtotal 74.95 and subtotal plus equals 20. What is the plus equals meaning?
Add $20.
Yeah, so we're going to add on, we're going to keep the existing value and add it on, right? Just a shorthand for writing subtotal equals subtotal plus 20. We can just use plus equals. And again, we can use it with any of the math operators. So we can use minus equals, times equals, divided equals. All of those are valid operators in JavaScript. Okay. So again, different ways of incrementing. So this would be the longhand to add one. This would be the shorthand, or we could use plus plus. Those are all functionally equivalent in JavaScript. Few examples with strings. So string concatenation in JavaScript is like in Java. Mercifully, it's not like in PHP with the idiotic dot operator. As concatenator, we use a simple plus for concatenating in JavaScript. Okay, and concatenation, the plus equals operator works for strings too. I know I'm going fairly quickly on this, so stop me if you have questions, but I'm assuming there's really nothing too earth-shattering here. Again, you can choose to use double or single quotes. In a lot of these examples, we use doubles. Typically in Node, we're going to use single quotes most of the time. When we look at the Node style guide a little bit, we'll see where we use double quotes. But basically, we just use double quotes for arrays of data, for JSON arrays. The rest of the time, the convention is to use single quotes around our strings in Node.
Is there any reason? Like it treats it as the same thing, doesn't it?
Basically, it does treat it as the same thing. It's a way of differentiating string values in code versus JSON arrays, okay, which is how we treat all. So it's basically a difference between code and data, in effect. So common escaping, so we'll use things like /n for new line. We'll have to escape special characters like quotes in our strings. We want to add tabs or put a backslash in our strings. We're going to escape them with a backslash. Again, same thing you've done in Java already. Couple of methods we might need for manipulating numbers. We've got parse int and parse float. If we try to perform math on a value that's not numeric, we'll get an NaN response, stands for not a number. And the similar kind of operators used. So we've got double equals. We're going to see one other operator a lot, right? So double equals for comparison, equals for assignment. We should talk about this one. Have you guys used triple equals before?
Yeah.
Some have, some haven't. Triple equals is used a lot in Node. Okay? You're going to see many places, you're going to see triple equals, and you're going to be thinking, why are they using triple equals, not double? It's similar to double, So double equals will check if two values are the same, right? Triple equals does the same, but it adds an additional check. So triple equals will tell you whether two values are equal. It will also tell you whether they're the same data type or not. So it's an extra way of checking. So most examples in Node where you're actually going to see triple equals a lot. We don't have types for variables. We don't have to declare types for variables, but it will still tell you whether the values are the same type. So I'll show you a few examples here. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. Take a minute, use a pen or use a text editor on your machine. Quick quiz for you. Okay. I want you to write down from 1 to 8 which expression for each number will it evaluate to true or false if it was inside of an if condition. Okay, and then we'll be able to see the difference between equals and double equals. So just make quick note from 1 to 8, mark down on a sheet of paper or a notepad, which of these expressions will evaluate to true, and which ones do you think will evaluate to false? So again, double equals is evaluating the values, triple equals is evaluating both the values and the data types, whether they're the same or different. So take a minute, as a quick quiz, ungraded, which are true and which are false. So Dan, just to follow up on your question, I guess I should have said this. Although JavaScript is loose, although we don't declare a type, once we assign a value, there's an implicit type, either number, string, or Boolean, that JavaScript implies or infers based on the value we give the variable. We don't explicitly declare it, but JavaScript will decide for us. So just mark true or false for each one of these. All right, so number 1. Well, this is where JS bin is useful. Let's try here. Okay, I may have to wrap it in.
You want console?
Oh, yeah, whoops. Thank you. I want console.
Put it in console.
So, let me do it this way. All right, I'll have to figure out why it's not working in JS bin. So this one is going to evaluate. Well, here are our answers. Basically, every one that uses double equals will evaluate to true. If we're just comparing those values, in this case, 0 and false are the same value as far as JavaScript is concerned. However, once we add the triple equals, it's going to evaluate to false, because even though the values are the same, the types are different, right? It implies that this is an integer and that's a Boolean. So the type checking is off. Same here. The values are the same, but once we add the third equal sign, it's also doing a data type conversion, and it says, yeah, okay, they're both, the values are 1, but we've got a number and we've got a string. So null and undefined pretty much is the same in JavaScript. It can't make sense of the type here. There is no type, so that's false. And again, here we're comparing a string to a Boolean. So a lot of the examples we're going to see, it isn't necessarily wrong to use double equals. It's just that using triple equals gives us that additional check, which the data type may be important for us. Any questions about triple equals? No?
I'm still a little hazy on what triple equals with null and undefined social size, because I'm still not certain what type of null even is at this point. I thought it was a string, but if undefined is defined, basically null and undefined are the same type, which is what type? It's null or
That's a good question. It's a very good question.
That's
I have a feeling that null is used for strings and undefined is used for like numeric values. So it's comparing an undefined numeric value with an undefined string.
I think
That's what
null
I'm
is for
thinking.
objects, empty strings is like 2 quote marks just by themselves. Yeah.
So it may be that this is an object or unknown type, and undefined is nothing. It's a good question. I'm not sure the answer, but I will try to find out a better answer for you.
If you try to print an empty object in your console, it gives you undefined. It doesn't give you null.
Yeah, like don't the function empty and instead one will give you null, one will give you undefined.
Let's see what happens.
Null is a defined value,
Ryan, have you hired Amanda as your spokeswoman? She's speaking for you, so if I ask you a question, Amanda will give the response. What does it say? What answer did you find that's better than the answer I've been able to find?
Variable that has been declared but not yet been assigned value, such an example. Null is an assigned value.
Okay.
An assigned value with no type.
An assigned value with no type. Okay. Very good question. So most of the time in your node code, you'll be okay to use either one, but we should be clear when you're seeing triple equals what it means. Okay, so it's the double equals with the additional type checking on it as well. Okay, I think this is a good place for us to take a pause.